Hi, everyone. We just need 1 minute just to kind of let people into the room, and then we will get started. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Ramadan Kareem to everyone. So I'll give it exactly one more minute just so that we can get everybody into the room and we will go ahead. Okay, I will get us started. So, hello, everybody. I'm Naila Faroui, the CEO of AFF. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you today to this incredibly critical and important conversation for so many reasons. So one thing is this conversation is being hosted by the Arab Foundations Forum on behalf of our member Alfanar, which is part of our member-led series of conversations. And it's one of the things that we kind of try to encourage our members to take advantage of, the members of the AFF network, which is really to sort of bring to the table and invite all of you into a conversation about whatever our members feel is important, whatever critical conversations are happening within their own kind of networks, and to invite all of you into this. And this particular conversation that we're having today about kind of unlocking the potential of zakat, I just feel is such a timely, critical, important conversation to be having, particularly at this time, for several different reasons. The first being, geopolitically, the context feels really just very ripe for funding and for looking at alternative models of funding. Um, the situation in Gaza, which has just in the last 48 hours, reignited and become horrific all over again. And something that I think is just really important to acknowledge and recognize that anytime we're having any of these conversations in our sector, I mean, honestly, if it comes from, if you're asking me, I think I don't know how we can be talking about anything else. But life has to go on, and we have to continue to do the work that we need to be doing. And in this conversation, that context is relevant anyway. So that's one issue, and Gaza obviously not being the only issue, but a very, very key issue. The other is around the U.S. funding freeze and the USAID freeze, kind of upending the entire sector, and in many cases really having ripple effects that I think we will feel and continue to feel for many, many, many years to come. And that's a whole other conversation that I know we will be having as a network. But in the context of this conversation that we're having today, not only the USAID funding freeze, but as well, being followed by several other major international funders and donors that are indicating their own reassessment of the international funding landscape, and in many cases for very key funding areas, whether they're, very critical health, education, reproductive rights, democracy, governance, all of that. So this kind of really sets the stage for an emergency and urgent assessment of how we can innovate funding a little bit differently. The other context, which is really key, is Ramadan. We're in the middle of, the holy month of Ramadan, a time when a lot of people do kind of reflect on what their own charitable giving is going to look like, and to sort of consider what some of the models of their own funding and giving will look like and their own charitable giving. So this, Zakat funding is a centuries old model, Zakat and other Islamic giving principles that kind of hold really untold potential. And in some cases, we know the estimates go as high as $1 trillion of capital that are being contributed into the development, the aid, the charitable system. And a lot of that seems to be either untapped potential or unleveraged in terms of its full potential. So we're very excited to be hosting this conversation, and to have Alfanar lead on this conversation with this incredibly esteemed panel of experts from different parts of the world. So I will let Safia take us through First of all, an introduction of our panelists. Second of all, an introduction and a kind of, laying the groundwork for what this conversation will be about. We will have an opportunity for all of you joining us to ask questions. There are two tabs in your Zoom console. One of them will be a chat tab. The other one is the Q&A tab. We prefer if you could please use the Q&A tab to ask your questions. That way it's a lot easier for us to monitor, but we will also be monitoring the chat tab just in case you forget. And then if there's anything else that you want to say that isn't necessarily a question, but that you'd like to direct to everyone joining today, you can put that in the chat. And then any of our follow-ups from our team, from Alfanar's team will also be included in the chat, which would include, links to anything that we reference. So that's kind of the housekeeping and logistics. I will now hand this over to Safia and say, welcome, Safia. Welcome, Alfanar team, and over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Naila and Ramadan Kareem, everyone. It's really, really exciting to be hosting and leading this conversation from Alfanar's perspective. And I think what Naila set really the stage nicely with the overall context. I want to put some numbers there for our guests. I think there's she mentioned the $250 to $1 trillion being deployed in zakat and sadaqah actually across the Muslim world. I think I love to actually put against that what are the needs, the funding needs in the region that are being overhauled today. And I think there's the 250 billion and counting, which is the reconstruction bill given all the conflicts that are happening, Gaza, Syria, Yemen, Sudan. And then against that, the SDG achievement bill, which is estimated today at roughly $660 billion annually. So we look at this, like the 1 trillion fund, up to 1 trillion zakat and sadaqah funding being deployed, 1 trillion in total funding needed to achieve the SDGs and reconstruct and rebuild our region. So the question becomes, how do we unlock that? And I think where we want to take this conversation today is really three building blocks. The first one being, what is zakat and how do we demystify actually the rules and frameworks to actually unlock and deploy zakat, and we're very, very lucky to count among us Dr. Sharik, who has written and worked extensively on this topic, and Mohammed Al-Banna, who take a really important perspective on zakat deployment from an Islamic banking perspective. The second question or building block will be around the opportunities and challenges in deploying zakat for strategic philanthropy. And we have, again, the operator view with Azim from Mercy Corp and Yasmin from Senate for Alternative Parental Care, who can really speak to what that means when it is properly deployed. And then lastly, I mean, we also want to land this conversation in very concrete steps and ask, and we hope that your questions will keep us as real as possible around like, how do we actually, what are the next steps tomorrow if we want to deploy this funding? So without further ado, I want to direct the first question to Dr. Sharik, which is, beyond the fundamental purpose of zakat, how is it actually deployed today? How is it being also taught about in the current broader context?
Thank you so much. Good morning from Indianapolis in the US, Safia, and thank you so much for the Arab Foundation Forum and Alfanar for having me today. It's a real honor and privilege to be here, and great to work alongside my dear friend Naila Faruqi in this. So I'm really excited about this topic because it's very, very current. Zakat is largely, there are two ways in which zakat is deployed and received. For example, in the United States, we have a population of 3.5 million Muslims, and they give around $1.8 billion in zakat. And the vast majority of the zakat in the United States is largely given through institutions. Now, this wasn't the case always. Prior to 2001, the vast majority of zakat in the United States was given informally, people to people. But post 9/11, zakat in the United States is largely given through institutions. Now, across the world, we've done surveys in 6 different Muslim majority countries. And what we've found is the vast majority of zakat in the rest of many of these countries is given informally. So not through Baitul Mals, not through institutions, but individuals to individuals. And so much of the discussion that we see happening across the world is whether zakat should be given through centralized institutions or Baitul Mals, which means that it becomes a macroeconomic solution to poverty alleviation, or should it be given individually, one-on-one, still strategic, still intentional, but maybe not a macroeconomic poverty alleviation mechanism, much more sort of up to the individual needs but that people perceive. And so this is a real dichotomy at a time where, if you think about the Muslim majority context, the vast majority of Muslim majority contexts actually see high levels of poverty. And so this question between informal and formal and macroeconomic and microeconomic zakat tools is a really important one.
Thank you. And I want to jump actually to Mohammed because he wrote a lot about zakat as a tool for financial empowerment and poverty reduction. And I think we'd love to hear about how do you see this dichotomy in practice that Dr. Shaikh just mentioned, but also what are your own findings and insights from your work on this topic? I think still on mute. Ah, perfect.
All right, sorry, I'm getting used to Zoom. Yeah. Thank you for hosting me. I'd like to also thank Arab Foundation for hosting us. And yes, zakat is something that I'm very passionate about, speaking about it, since I have done like a good amount of research on it. And I would like to also highlight the fundamentals to understand what is zakat. So allow me to go back to the fundamentals of zakat. So we all know that, of course, zakat was among the 4 main pillars of Islam. The 5 main pillars of Islam, sorry, like the Shahada, prayers, and zakat, annual fasting, and once in a lifetime pilgrimage. Now, at the time of Prophet ﷺ, it was ordained for all Muslims. So it was like an emphatic proof of accepting Islam was to do zakat. So I would like just to start with that, and also it's being highlighted in a scrupulous manner in how much the percentage of zakat is to be taken from the wealthy to the people who are impoverished. And it is also delineated in a way that we have the 8 recipients of zakat, right? Which is very, very well mentioned in the Quran, which is the fuqara and masakin, those who collects them and whose hearts are also to be reconciled, and the captives and the debtors and the cause of Allah and the wayfarer, Ibn Sabil. So coming back to your questions, Dr. Safiya, so is there specific questions you asked me to elaborate on?
I think the perspective from wealth management, and I think reacting a bit to Dr. Sharikh's point on deployment, is it direct to people? I mean, how do we see actually this evolving in the context of the Gulf, the direct deployment, people to people essentially, or people to institutions as interfaces? How do you see that in the Gulf?
All right. In the Gulf, we are really, we can say, very lucky to have governments like UAE and the GCC in general, because they are like very generous in terms of zakat. Just every year they're like putting up like in endowments. Now this year it had been like the endowment has been towards the father. And they have another endowment for the 1 billion meal. So once the whole country is geared after the same endowment, it becomes so easy to collect the money from the society. Not only that, now here it's very institutionalized. We have the Zakat fund. It is only catered towards UAE, in only UAE. We have Bayt al Khair, also another very well-known charitable institution. We have Dar al Bir. We have so many, and the Red Crescent, of course, in the UAE. They cater in and out of UAE. And yes, they cater to Palestine, Gaza. They cater to Sudan and all the places which are currently having like hardships. So yeah.
Thank you for that. Maybe now shifting a bit to Azim, and really, so we heard about, like what are the models in which zakat is deployed, how is it done at a specific country level. Azim, can you actually maybe speak to some of the challenges in the distribution model today? Like we're talking about collecting and pulling the funds. How is that being reached and distributed on the ground?
Yeah, thank you, Sophia. I would say it's unfortunately done very simply. Yeah. So it's generally a process of remittances moving across the world, generally deployed on the most basic humanitarian welfare requirements, the purchase of food, the purchase of emergency shelter. As the previous speaker mentioned, focusing on zones of conflict and disaster, be it in the Middle East or in parts of East Africa, especially. So generally, it's quite unfortunate. The practice is very simple. It's very basic. And I think, I would be, I don't know if it's almost inappropriate to say, but it's also against the very spirit of zakat, because zakat shouldn't be confused with charity in any way, shape, or form. And unfortunately, it's typically managed by charities, it's inherently problematic. Zakat is the financial firepower of Islam. It is the basis for its presentation and its preservation. And the reason it is so important, and the evidence of that, is in the first transition of power that Islam experienced from Muhammad ibn Abdullah, the Prophet of God, to Abu Bakr. He was willing to go and fight people that had said La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah for withholding the zakat. It was that important for the collective personality of Islam, its strength, its honor, its growth, its preservation, that you had this most bizarre circumstance that the leader of the faithful was willing to fight an internal war, like at a time of crazy priorities, for the very reason that if we let this structure fail, if we let this pillar fall from its actual divine purpose, it will have an existential impact on the way that the faith will grow and be strengthened. And that's what we have today in the Muslim world. It's very unfortunate. I don't want to be a critique of the Muslim world in this at all, but it's generally managed in the most basic, elementary fashion. And often it's a tool of, I would say, appeasement. Yeah. So often sovereign Muslim countries or Muslim majority countries, they would use the zakat of the people to say, oh, look, we're doing this in this other country, regardless of, say, being complicit in half of their problems. But also there is major issues in and around, there's no space for innovation. There's no place for ijtihad. There's no genuine effort to understand what are the modern day priorities. So for example, the previous speaker had very kindly mentioned the 8 categories of zakat. If you were to look, and I don't have the data for this, but I have provided consultancy and support to sovereign Muslim nations as well as major NGOs. If you were to look at practice and deployment in the 8 categories, you're going to find deployment generally in the first 2 only. The idea of fi sabilillah scares the life out of people. The idea of mu'allafat qulubihim scares the life out of people, because like, what does that mean today, right? You know, and I would go so far as to say, you know, mu'allafat qulub is just your modern day lobby, right? It's a lobbyist that you see walking around London, Washington, and New York. That's the equivalent of mu'allafat qulub in many ways. If you look at the idea, for example, of freeing the slave, right, which is a legitimate category in Islam, the Gulf was built by slaves, essentially, right? It's built by migrant workers that are kept in bondage from Asia, generally. But would zakat ever be used to deal with those kinds of issues? Probably not, because it's politically problematic. So I think it's one of those things where the general practice is unfortunately basic. I don't feel from the general spirit of the faith. But also and we're seeing the consequences of that. So when you look at the conflict, for example, in Gaza and in the wider Palestinian territories, you know, I have contact and dialogue with a number of agencies there. And when you speak to them, they say the primary use that they would see for zakat would be to retain the zakat and spend it on lobby activity in the UK and the US. You know, they don't actually crave food boxes and shelter and these things, because they're like, look, you know, at the end of the day, we're being kept and subjugated under these conditions. The primary benefactor of aid in Gaza will probably still be Egypt and Israel. So it's one of those things where because we've lost the spirit, we're always just trying to find the closest other deployment, which means it's easier to do a zakat campaign for a $50 food box and a $150 tent than actually to deal with the honor of Islam that is compromised and slaughtered in the streets across many sovereign Muslim lands without any problem whatsoever.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And really this, again, like going from the intentionality of it to the practice of it to innovating, to actually rethink about the purpose of zakat in the current context, in the current challenges that we're facing. And maybe, Yasmin, if I may direct the next question to you, how is that looking from your end, you know, as a social enterprise working for a cause? How is it, you know, how is zakat actually helping or not helping you solve some of the challenges that you're managing on the ground?
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I hope you can hear well. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay.
I think it's, yeah.
Okay. First of all, thank you for this interesting and important topic that I think everyone, I can see the number of attendants is really high. I'm very happy with this high interest in such topics, especially nowadays. And I have to say that, yes, social enterprises are also facing challenges.
I think we lost you. Yes. I think she's reconnecting.
Sorry, right now? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Yasmin.
Okay. I think that NGOs and social enterprises could be closer to the meaning of zakah or the recipient of zakah, but still we are having some challenges, but I'll tell you how we overcome some of these challenges. Working in the development field is a little bit challenging to attract zakat min al-mal, because usually people associate the investment or the money they want to spend to a very immediate change and immediate impact. When it comes to development, it takes time. It takes time to change human beings' lives. It takes time to educate people. It takes time to improve the living of children, for example, without parental care in orphanages. It takes time to build the capacity of caregivers. These are the things we are working in. So usually people prefer to spend the zakat mal on charitable thing, and here I will echo Mr. Azim when he said,
I can't hear anything,
it's not
guys.
charity.
I could hear.
Can you hear my voice?
Yes, we can. Yasmin, sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Okay. So people mixed up between really the meaning and the concept and the spirit of zakat, which is gross, and between charitable efforts or charitable work. At Zakat, what we did is we addressed the Al-Azhar and Dar al-Ifta, and this is actually the entity in Egypt responsible for doing or producing fatwa to aware or to raise the awareness of people if whether our work is applicable for zakat al-mal and could receive zakat al-mal or not. And one of the challenges, for example, I'll give you a very, very small challenge about awareness and lack of awareness. Orphans. In zakat al-mal, there is no clear term that zakat al-mal will go to orphans. So people, if they did not read and aware themselves, they will not realize that actually spending zakat al-mal on orphans are one of the recipients. Yes, some of the orphans are with unknown parents. So people started to debate, the donors. Should we pay the zakat al-mal for orphans who actually lost really their father at a younger age, or only, or we can actually put our zakat al-mal for the ones with unknown parents, because we are not sure should we consider them orphans or not. So again, we addressed Dar al-Ifta, and actually they said that people, children with unknown
Sorry,
parents, they
Yasmin, I
receive
think
or
we're
they
losing
deserve.
you.
You're losing my voice? I'm sorry for the connection.
No worries. I mean, maybe if, I mean,
Is it better right now?
yes, it's better, yes.
Okay, okay. So I closed, okay. So what I'm saying here that when we addressed Dar al-Ifta about, for example, this controversial issue about orphans, to children with unknown parents, who we consider them orphans in the development sector, should they receive zakat al-mal or not? We found out that they deserve zakat al-mal. So what I'm trying to say, knowledge and research is very important for social enterprises and NGOs to be able to communicate that they are part of the recipients. This is one thing. And to link their causes to zakat al-mal. This is one thing. The other thing is we need more awareness, public awareness about zakat al-mal and its recipients by different entities to build this community, aware community, and mindful community about where to put my zakat al-mal.
Thank you, Yasmin. And maybe just to play back a bit what you said, I think what I'm taking away is three things. I think one, there is, you know, like the onus from on social enterprises to actually really think about and research how they can pull in more zakat funding and work, I mean, both within the ecosystem, but also with religious authorities, as you've done with Al-Azhar, to issue fatwas when it comes to defining actually the purpose of zakat. The second part is really that tension between short-term impact and long-term impact, and we're seeing some of the questions on the chat on that. And then lastly, raising awareness that there are more uses of zakat than the traditional original ones, and maybe that's actually the transition to the more, you know, solution oriented part of this panel, which is thinking about innovative ways to deploy, again using some of the Q&A questions from Hala and Dua on long-term residual initiatives, like how can we actually deploy zakat to more long-term impact initiatives in climate, in education, in financial empowerment. And maybe Dr. Sharik, you can shed some light on that.
Sure, thank you so much. And I think I'll share three what I would say innovative models from the United States, right? Not to say that but just because I do research there, I've done case studies here, I'd say 3 that I think are really interesting. So the first is Zakat Foundation of America, which is a nonprofit organization in the United States, Chicago-based. They were concerned about sort of long-term issues. So for example, if we're going to have ihsan in Zakat, we need trained professional Zakat professionals. So they launched something called the Zakat Foundation Institute. The Zakat Foundation Institute is a Indiana Commission on Higher Education approved graduate school. They're launching a doctoral program. They have a master's program and a graduate certificate in humanitarian leadership, right? And through that program, they are educating those people that will be at the front lines of these conversations. So again, Zakat Foundation does all the other stuff, orphan care, they support orphans, they provide food, they do all that kind of stuff. But they said, you know what, we need to go forward. We need to do something more and create the long-term solution, because one of the 8 pillars of one of the 8 causes of Zakat are the Zakat collectors. So within that, we need to make sure we have the very best, right? And I think that's an interesting model. It's the first graduate school focused on this. The second one, also from Zakat Foundation of America, is we had a big Rohingya population coming in at some point in the United States. So one option is we just give financial support and let them have the rent, and which Zakat Foundation did. But they went to this community and said, what do you need to get onto your feet? And they said, we need a center. So they developed a Rohingya advocacy center in Chicago. It's a masjid, but it's also more than that. They go out and get federal grants and state grants and local grants. They provide education and training. And so they built a system of resilience within that refugee community. And again, one of the 8 categories are people that are wayfarers or displaced and so on. And so within that, they said, let's create something more permanent. And so ultimately, it's empowering refugees to sort of that were refugees to now become sort of the supporters of that program. And then third is Islamic Relief USA. In the United States, Islamic Relief USA is the largest Muslim-led NGO. They raise over $160 million a year. And they said, you know what? We want to do more than just alleviate hunger today. We want to create the infrastructure for hunger alleviation and refugee resettlement in the United States. So they then took, I think it's $15 million of their funds, and they grant those out to grassroots NGOs in the United States, across the country, that alleviate hungers, food pantries, and so on, in a grant-making program, and arguably the largest grant maker to Muslim-led nonprofits in the United States. The interesting thing about that is that the way they did it, they then added to that additional support in training these NGOs on how to manage grants, training these NGOs how to get grants, how to do their work in excellence, right? And so these small grassroots NGOs that were doing hunger relief at the local level now have the capacity and they have the legitimacy, because when they have to manage the Islamic Relief grant, there's compliance with it. They can now go out and get more grants and say, look, we already have experience of getting grants and so on. So these are 3 great examples. The last one I'll share, again, just to, because my brother Azim is here and he's done some innovative and amazing work, but an organization he founded, which is the National Zakat Foundation in UK, we just published a research project which showed that the way NZF UK administers housing support in UK saves the British government 60 something pounds in housing support. So the argument that we made, and I think National Zakat Foundation is now making to the British government, is we can do housing alleviation much better than the government does. So maybe take those 60 pounds that you're spending there and channel it through Zakat collection agencies. And so NZF UK shows that the way NGOs do Zakat deployment is largely grassroots, more effective, and more efficient. And so these are 4 great examples of how NGOs are trying to sort of blur the boundaries and sort of try to sort of struggle within the discourse. Now, one of the big challenges, though, is, and some of the chat questions are asking this, is that the ulama, and there's a great diversity and disagreement about what you can and can't do. many ulama are, and many people in our community would argue that you can only use it, as Azim argues in a really great article that he produced, that most people think there's only 2 categories of, out of the 8. They don't even think about the 6 other ones, right? And Azim makes a very powerful point in some of the writings that he's done. He's spoken about this. And so I think the big part of what we need to do is to have this broader conversation about how zakat actually is 8 categories. And these 3-4 examples are ways in which some NGOs have done that.
Thank you. Thank you. And actually, it's, I mean, very, very inspiring to hear about these examples and models. And I wonder, and maybe that's a question to Mohammed before we move to Azim to explore more innovative models, if this is a question of one, sophistication of the market and the, you know, quote unquote ijtihad, or is it a question of more appetite from the donor's lens to more grassroots, more institutionalized giving? And maybe Mohammed, you can speak to that. The question is on the donor's side. So from a wealth management perspective, how do people foresee their giving from a objective perspective, the direct to people, or are they open to give it through institutions and to pooled funds?
Yeah, okay. So regarding wealth management now and wealth families, the appetite is always there. Now, you find, especially upon the wealthy segment, they are very into charitable giving. And not only here in the Muslim world, as well as even the Western world. But how do they approach? Where do they approach that? That's I think everyone is having his own means of how to approach or where to approach the charitable institutions. I hope I answered the question, Ms. Safiya.
Yes, thank you. So maybe Azim, to you to speak a bit more to some concrete examples on how to deploy and how to invite actually more long-term value from zakat pools.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a really interesting time, and you know, I have the privilege to be working with Dr. Shark very soon on actually furthering this conversation in an event in Istanbul called the Global Donors Forum. I think the innovation that is going on is increasingly in the Muslim minority context, where we don't have, let's say, the subjugation of like Ministry of Islamic Affairs or Ministry of Awqaf or anything like that. But the demand is definitely there. And we're now increasingly seeing the entry of zakat funds into the lobby space and the human rights space, which I think is really important, because often we are just dealing with the symptoms. We're not dealing with the actual root illness that is problematic. So what you'll find is, and I'm sure Dr. Sharik will know much better than I from his vast research, but there's increasing efforts to look at, you know, what role do we play in civil society. So, you know, Dr. Sharik got a really interesting piece on like the macroeconomic or the place in macroeconomics where we can actually look at what is the role of zakat as a fiscal tool at a state level, right? So I think as those practices become more and more spoke about, entertained, I met with the Minister of Communities in the UK to speak about the role of zakat, for example, and how we should consider zakat alongside taxes as opposed to, let's say, instead of taxes, but how the value of the Muslim diaspora can be exacerbated by showing the value that we bring. So, for example, here there's a recent report done by a new think tank called EQUI, and it was like, what's the Muslim contribution to society? And so it was in the UK, and it was around £70 billion that was identified. And it's like, actually, what role does our own wealth play in lifting our own structures, our own sense of community, our own sense of well-being? Because in the absence of that, you find it's actually quite depressing, but you'll see there'll be lots of other groups that might be involved. So, for example, you look at, say, like, take Indonesia, for example, you know, largest sovereign Muslim nation on the planet, and probably, I would, maybe victims are too hard a word, but, you know, home to the largest movement of missionaries in a singular country anywhere in the world, right? Christian missionaries, mainly from the US and Australia, heavily congregate on Indonesian soil. But because zakat is often not considered in the view of the strength and preservation of Islam, those people are not necessarily involved in dealing with that challenge of missionary activity. It's left more on the charity side. So on the innovation side, I think what we are seeing in the Western countries is a view, how do we empower individuals and whole communities to step up? And like I said, I'm personally involved with a number of efforts looking at the lobby side to say that, how does that work? I had a very, wonderful and blessed conversation with a senior jurist in Saudi Arabia about the role of zakat in dealing with human trafficking and prostitution. So if you were to look at, say, the idea of freeing the slave, the days of having slave markets in Mecca are over, yeah? But is slavery over? No way. Yeah, we see those trafficked workers in so many places. You see stories all the time, for example, in the GCC, of basically people from Ethiopia and African countries which are kept in bondage, which is essentially modern day slavery. You see people that are moved around and in coaches with set uniforms, not paid their wages. They're essentially enslaved. And it's like, how can we play a role in allowing those people to win their freedom, which is zakat is there for? Because in the most simplest form, if we look at it like this, what is the role of zakat in a civil society? And maybe a simple summary is it's to remove the trials of the world so that the believer can have a relationship with the divine. That's the purpose of the zakat. It's just to remove the dunya problem, right? So if that dunya problem is food, debt, slavery, whatever it is, so that the individual believer, and it's obviously in Ramadan, I'm sure we all feel this more, that the closest, most blessed comfort you have in your life is if you have a relationship with your Lord. So it doesn't matter what trouble you've got, what difficulty you've got, when you can put your head down and find that you can be at one with your creator, it's the most empowering place on the planet. That's why, despite all the carnage we see in Gaza, you see the greatest power on the face of this earth is Gaza. What Gaza represents is the greatest force of human beings in the world. With the irony, it has nothing of this world. It doesn't even have a roof to cover its head. It doesn't have an ability to feed its children, but it has more power and strength than any nation of the GCC or any of the Muslim world, because it stands firm. It has the world's largest military dropping bombs on women and children, blowing their heads off. And that woman, if you see her in any news interview and they say, how are you? She says, Alhamdulillah. You see a 4-year-old child will stand tall and firm, brave, with a doll in her hand, and she'll stand up to an IDF soldier. This is power like we've never seen before. So I think what's really important is that we go back to the purpose of zakat, which is to build the believers to be the strong and powerful people they were, and to be able to project that in a really strong and positive way, wherever they may be, in a Muslim majority or Muslim minority. And any organization that seeks to do that is, in my view, and in the scholars that I'm engaged with, is zakatable. So it's moving it from that paradigm of, oh, okay, the tamlik of the wealth needs to be with the poor person to be able to just, yeah, no problem. But is our problem as an ummah poverty? I don't think so. We have a poverty of the mind, which is much greater than the poverty of the pocket, which means we're looking to the wrong places for the answers. If there was to be a world meeting, for example, of Muslims and say, where do we learn lessons of strength, of courage, of bravery? It wouldn't be in any country apart from in Palestine. There's no way. Because every sovereign Muslim nation has bowed its head and said, I'm sorry, I can't help. We will see photos of iftar in the Muslim world where people will be having $10,000 plate food. Yeah, dates are $100 for 4 dates. The most opulence and most extreme use of wealth in a bit, and hosting Israelis, for iftar and the crazy things like this. And yet we think there's power and strength there. There's no power and strength there. There's actually nothing but weakness. So what zakat can do, in my view anyway, is help build strong individuals and strong institutions that allow us to stand up and say, it's not about your material wealth. It's not about the balance sheet of the individual or the organization. It's about the impact that they're having on the people that they seek to serve, Muslim or non-Muslim. Because, even if you look at the idea of Mu'allafat al-Qulub, how many a time has Allah strengthened the religion with people not of the religion? Many a time, many a time. I can say some of my greatest allies in this country are both Christians and Jewish and Hindu people. Like they're just allied in the idea of a civil society means we should all be stronger, we should all benefit. If you look at generally Muslim world countries, there's extreme gap between the wealthy and the poor. Extreme. Yeah, it's like 100, 200 times, right, of difference in the basic wealth standard. What zakat does is it seeks to build that relationship between the rich and the poor. It says like, you cannot have your wealth to be pure and halal and tayyib to feed your family unless you took out the share for the others. And for the others, they don't take it as a charity. They don't take it as a gift. They take it as a right. This is their right as colleagues and as community. So I feel that there's a wonderful positive sentiment that is emerging, and we should embrace that innovation wherever it may come from. I think there's some people doing some great work even in the Gulf, in Indonesia, in Malaysia. Like I don't know, Dr. Sharik, if you've seen this, I saw a wonderful case study from Indonesia where they were deploying zakat through masajid, and they said that the shorter the gap between the congregation of Fajr and Jummah, the greater amount of zakat the masjid would get. I thought, what a great idea, because it was empowering the masjid to be the center of the community, and said, the better you serve your people, the more money we will give you to serve your people. What a wonderful, blessed idea. Dr. Irfan Bek, who's a wonderful academic and practitioner in Indonesia, he covers it in his PhD thesis. And it's like, this is the kind of thing we want. If we're trying to build a civil society where everybody is stronger, Muslim, non-Muslim, we all win. Any society where Muslims are weaker, everybody loses. And I think that's where we should be looking at innovation, so how we build our communities together, rich and poor, black and white, Arab, non-Arab, Muslim, non-Muslim. And zakat is our financial firepower to be the strongest people on the planet. And that doesn't mean we sit in the White House, or it doesn't mean that we have big militaries. It means that we are the people that everybody wants to protect, because there's only goodness that comes from Islam and those that follow it.
Thank you, Azim. And it's really, I mean, beautiful, beautiful words on the intention, on the ways to do it. I mean, I would almost close the conversation on these words.
I just want to add
Yes,
something about
I was gonna give it to you, I think, and start actually
Thank you.
tapping into the Q&A. I mean, and maybe I'll direct this question on you, especially on the Azhar point, which is from Nishaj. Is there a movement in the Arab world with sheikhs and muftis that are actually saying similar things, advocating similar uses, and how is that? I mean, Egypt, obviously, with Al Azhar would be the right use case for that, if you can speak to it, Yasmin.
I would say, first of all, I want to thank Mr. Azim for this inspirational and very motivating and very insightful, actually, points he mentioned. Maybe because of Egypt, it has lots of civil society, NGOs, I mean, many NGOs in different fields, whether developmental fields or charitable fields. So maybe they managed collectively, or not collectively, I mean, separately, to advocate that their work is eligible for Zakat al-Mal, through also having fatwa from Dar al-Ifta. But this is not enough. A single effort is not as powerful as collective efforts. Two things I want to mention about the innovation part is to start with the younger generation, not only creating professional people in the Zakat al-Mal is perfect. Because I remember I had my education at the UAE, and I was taught how to calculate Zakat al-Mal. I was taught at school, what does it mean? Each of the 8 categories or masarif zakah, what are they, and the sub, and what do they mean? This kind of education at schools, I'm not sure it's well established at early stage. This is very important because you are creating a generation with good information, and they can understand the concept at early stage, and it's embedded, it will last. So this is the first thing. The other thing is using technology. Now we have many usage of the AI and the ChatGPT and many things. People need a quick someone to answer them, reliable. They cannot tolerate waiting. Picking the phone, the call center, and calling the Sorry, can you hear me? Okay. They cannot tolerate. They cannot tolerate or they need something quick and fast and reliable. So maybe using technology could help also in this movement or creating this notion. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasmin. We'll open the floor for a few questions, like 2 questions, and then we'll hand it over to Naila to close a really, really important conversation. I think there's a question on measuring impact, and maybe Dr. Sharik, how, basically, is how can we enhance Zakat to measure impact within the fund and in the personal staff? Is that something that we're seeing already?
Yeah, I think I worry about this question about impact measurement. This is largely an external piece that's very modern, and it doesn't come from the centrality of Islamic philanthropy. Ultimately, what is the impact to me of what will Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hold me accountable? Is did I give my zakat and did I give it on time and did I give it quickly? That's it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to hold me accountable or for whether or not the NGO or the zakat recipient, like I don't have to go into the house and say, okay, I gave you zakat. Did you use it for food or did you use it for alcohol? That's not my job, right? My job is to give it. And I think right now, because of, I would say, largely from a very Western centric, very centralized kind of idea of impact measurement, Muslim philanthropy is being driven into this really bad place where we're supposed to act as, rather than as acting as philanthropists, which are innovators, right? That are doing it in partnership with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that God brings the impact, right? We are saying, no, let's take God out of the equation. We are going to go in and measure the impact, right? And I think that's problematic. So I think on one side, that's important. But on the other side, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does expect us to think about our zakat as a resource that is done with ihsan. And so how would I argue both, and this fits within the traditions of philanthropy at its very best, the way the Lilly Endowment practices it, the Ford Foundation practices it. So it's not something, which is you go out and you find someone you trust, and then you just give them the money, and then you don't hassle them about it, right? You don't ask them about overhead cost, admin cost. You don't do that, because if you spend your time, the problem with impact is that on one side we want impact, on the other side we're lazy, right? We don't want to spend time to build trusting relationships. When our NGO calls us and says, hey, can we set up a call and tell you what we did the money? We'll ghost them, right? So a lot of philanthropists, like these are what my students say, we call and we want to tell them about what we did with their money, and they're not even responding to us. So I think more important on impact is to have a personalized look at the zakat giver and be impactful with yourself. Are you building trusted relationships? Are you keeping the doors open? Are you giving your money quickly and on time? Don't become overly burdened. I'll tell you one last example. One of the things that bothers me is that sometimes I go and see zakat distribution, and I see this, I go to Africa and people are coming in from the Gulf and so on. So they come to this one place and they're giving away food boxes. And there's a line. And if you talk to the people in the line, some have come for 3-4 hours. Imagine this. Poor people, zakat eligible recipients, pay for the privilege of someone fulfilling their obligation to zakat. Can you imagine that? Like some very wealthy person went to the center of town in some place and then required other people to pay to come there to collect the zakat. In essence, the responsibility of giving the zakat is the wealthy person's, that person who gives it, but they're burdening the poor. So I think when we have these conversations about impact, we should be having the conversations around there. Are we causing a burden on those that we are receiving our zakat and purifying our wealth? Those are the impact calculations that we should have. So I know it's not where I think the question was asked, but that's what I think is very important. I think we need to look at ourselves internally because that is what we're responsible for.
Absolutely agreed. Thank you. And maybe last question to Azim on building communities and civil society to be stronger. And if, you know, if that's one of the, you know, purposes of Zakat, on building that human-centered leadership, how can it be done more effectively?
Yeah, that's a big question, Sister Sophia, you know. And I would say it's a wonderful question to ask in a blessed month, in blessed days. My answer, unfortunately, will be very, very simple. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Qu anfusakum wa ahlikum nara." He reminds in the Quran that you save yourself and then your families from the fire. So I believe the way to really build a strong civil society is just start with yourself. Look at the way that you practice your own religion, your own sense of community, how you serve your own neighbors, your own colleagues, how you enjoying the good and bring people away from the difficulties that they have in life. And because the reality is the only reason we're Muslim today is there was a wonderful man. His name was Muhammad ibn Abdullah. He was a prophet of God, the finest of his creation. And an angel came upon him. And what did he do? He just ran to his wife. And he shared it with her, and then he ran to his best friend and his kid cousin. That's how Islam grew, and it was strong and I say powerful. It was strong and graceful, and it yielded so much benefit to the world because it did what, like I think Dr. Sharik was also alluding to. It brought that personal vested interest in that this is about me being a better person and having a standing in front of my Lord where I'm proud to be held to account. And just that naturally brings so much goodness. Like if I'm good with myself and I try to be good with my family and my colleagues and with you guys, that will have a positive effect. Sophia, I'm sure you're a really great person, and I'm sure the team that you work in, as they see your grace, they will benefit from who you are. And it's the same thing. There's no magic wand. There's no new prophet turning up here that's going to get us all excited. But if we all just took a little bit more personal responsibility and were vested a little bit more, because often, like I think Sister Yasmina made a really wonderful point when she said, in earlier times, there may have been an effort for education around zakat. Today, it's an assumption. It's just like, okay, whatever's left in your bank, after a year, 2.5% comes out. But even if you just look at on a practical level for all of us, how do we consider our pensions? How do we consider any crypto that we hold? How do we consider any land that our parents left behind in Tunisia or Malaysia or Pakistan or Bangladesh? Like, we don't consider it. And these things seem alien to us sometimes. But if there was some effort just in the calculation, even the blessing of that would bring, I think, blessings for us all. So I believe the way to a civil society is being civil yourself and finding your oneness with God in that journey. And then as that happens, like it did from the finest man that walked this earth, Muhammad ibn Abdullah, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, it will happen with us because he showed us the way to do it. He was just the best guy ever. And, he was great with everyone. And that's why when you read Sirah, sometimes you just laugh at the wonder of his grace and his way versus the wonder of the way that we are today. Even, for example, we talk about scholars and jurists. It's a very politicized thing in the Muslim world, unfortunately. But, and I'll finish with this, guys. There's a wonderful example about how you can bring strength to any weakness from the life of our beloved. And it was once that he was sat with his companions, and he was with his grandson Hassan. So Hassan had a stutter, radiallahu an. So he had a speech impediment. And it is said that once he was sat with the companions, and Hassan was trying to speak to his grandfather. Obviously, if you imagine any gathering and your grandfather's the center of attention, he's the greatest guy in the gathering, you want to speak to him so people know who you are. So Hassan tried to speak to his grandfather, but he had a stutter, so he was struggling. And I'm sure we've all been in that kind of environment. When somebody's stuttering, it gets a bit weird. Yeah. So people were looking at Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam like, come on, man, like, get the kid to finish, and they say that it's very, if you finish somebody's lines when they're stuttering, it only makes it worse. Yeah. Like, you need to give them the space so they get confident and they carry on. And Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, being just the wonderful man he was, he let Hassan finish. But he was obviously, he understood the room. He had the greatest emotional intelligence. So as he looked around the room, and he could sense the frustration in the eyes, and people had been the way they've been looking, and he said, "Warathiha min ammi Musa," that he inherited this from his uncle Moses. Now you just look at the amazing thing he did there. He took the weakness of the weakest person in the room, and he made it the greatest strength that could be alongside him. He made something so weak turn into a characteristic of one of the greatest men alongside himself. And I think just imagine if we were able to do things like that in the way that we look at ourselves, we look at our society, the way that we look at the poor versus the rich. They say that the way that you treat, for example, a quote unquote a VIP versus the way that you treat the waiter that served you the food when you were having it with the VIP. That's a test of your integrity and what I would say your Islam. So if you don't even acknowledge the waiter when they come, you don't look them in the eye, you don't say thank you. That's your reality, not that all the thank you and the please you're doing with the rich guy that you're having the dinner with. So it's the way to build that civil society in my mind is just to find that civil society in your own mind first. And if we could all do that, I think we'd be living in a very different world. Apologies if that's a slightly convoluted answer, but it's unfortunately so simple in my view.
Thank you, Azim, and thank you. And I mean, I feel this is such an inspiring call actually to embody and model what Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam does in our everyday lives, and actually, especially in Ramadan. I can't think of another closing except thanking you for your words and for this very, very exciting conversation, and thanking all our panelists for joining and sharing their wisdom. And we hope, to have many more of these conversations, and we'll keep you tuned on these if you sign up to our newsletter. And I'll hand it over to Naila to close.
Safia, thank you so much. And thank you so much to our panelists. I mean, so many things. I don't know if you could see me. I'm just like nodding the entire time Azim was talking. I almost jumped through the screen to like applaud. And really just to everything that each one of you is saying. And, I'm a very proud fellow of the Zakat Foundation Institute, and also a very proud recipient of a scholarship to the master's program, where Dr. Shadiq is my very esteemed professor. So you can see why I'm so honored to have all of you here with us. And I really just, I'm very grateful for the framing, Azim and Dr. Shadiq and Yasmin and Muhammad, of just the reminder, especially in this moment, the reminder of the niyyah and the intentionality behind not only the spirit and the ethos of Islam as a concept, as a religion, as a lifestyle, but even more specifically around this topic of zakat and what, and Azim, you reminding us of the difference between charity and zakat and the obligation of zakat, and kind of, why it is such a pillar of Islam. And so I'm just so grateful for you bringing such moral clarity, all of you, to this conversation, and particularly because it's in this moment that we're in now. And so again, I appreciate and thank you for the acknowledgement of this moment and kind of like bringing us all to focus. So there were so many questions in this incredible conversation that I know we should have kept it for longer, but I will not keep you longer. So what I think we're going to do is we will reconvene with our Alfanar partners and members and see when we can maybe host a follow-up conversation to this. I don't think a conversation around unlocking the potential of zakat is a one-off conversation by any means. And I do want to be able to, make sure that we get to all of your questions. A lot of them actually are questions that I myself would love to hear the answers to. So we'll try to reconvene all of us again. Thank you so much to everyone. Please go have a blessed iftar if it's your iftar time, or an easy fast if you're still fasting. Thank you so much. Thank you, Safia. Thank you, Alfanar team. Thank you, panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Ma salam.